Okay, so first of all, I have updated the web page. Uh, so I have added notes for the material for the next 2 weeks. I mean, I've added a link. These are not my notes. Okay. So good. So let me remind you what we did last time. So we proved the following theorem. So if you consider plane partitions of n with at most r rows and s columns, then the generating function of these guys weighted by the size of the plane partition is this nice product formula, which is I goes from 1 to r, j goes from 1 to s, 1 by 1 minus q to the I plus j minus 1. So what remains to be done in this business is to prove the generating function for plane partition. So that's going to now fall out as an easy corollary. So first, let us understand what's going on here. So if you look at any particular factor over here, it's going to occur. So let's say I'm looking at 1 minus q par k. For example, okay, 1 minus q par k, I'm going to get a contribution. Let's say k is not too large. Then I'm going to get a contribution from, for every I, when j is I minus k plus 1 or something. Right? So then I'll get a q to the k. And so, so each or a lot of terms here occur with multiplicity. That's sort of the point. Okay. So as a corollary of the previous result, okay, before that, just need a definition. So let pp sub r of n be the number of plane partitions of n with at most r rows. So now no restriction on s, the number of columns. So remember earlier pprs was the number of plane partitions with at most r rows and at most s columns. So here we are going to ease that restriction a little bit. So, and remember pp of n was the number of plane partitions of n, period, no restriction. So we have two immediate consequences of the previous theorem, which is that the first one is the generating function of ppr of n, q to the n. This is the product k greater than or equal to 1 by 1 minus q par k raised to the minimum of k and r. R is the number of rows. And from this, the generating function that we want will fall out. So pp of n is 1 by 1 minus q par k raised to the k. And it's sort of clear. So proof is easy consequence of this. Proof follows immediately from previous theorem. So how many times does a power k appear? How many times does the term 1 minus q par k appear here? That's what you want to see, and you want to let s go to infinity. So then you will get k powers until a certain amount of time, after which you will only get r powers. Right? And so it's just a matter of convincing yourself. And then here, when you let r go to infinity, the minimum of k and r is of course k, and then okay. So right. So any questions about this? Okay. So as promised, I have proved the generating function for plane partition. So as you saw, so recall that we already had the formula for plane partition for regular partitions. So recall that sigma Pn q bar n is product k greater than or equal to 1 minus q bar k. And so you might be tempted to consider, so these are two-dimensional analogs of partitions, plane partitions, and this is one-dimensional. So you might be tempted to consider three-dimensional analogs. So what is a three-dimensional analog? So you have, so similarly, one can consider a 3D analog. This is so-called solid partitions. So, so what is it? So I mean, so this is arrays pi I j k, I j k greater than or equal to 1, so that just writing this is going to be a pain, but it's kind of clear what it is. So pi I j k is greater than or equal to pi I plus 1 j k. It's also greater than I j greater than or equal to I j plus 1 k and pi I j k plus 1. So it's weakly decreasing in all directions, and you think of this as an increasing array, so that with mod pi being equal to the sum over ijk being finite. So you can take the generating function of this, and so if I let in analogy with if I call it PPPN with the number of solid partitions of n, you want the generating function of PPP of n. Okay. Now it turns out for any sequence, integers, the generating function can be written in the form so let me write it specifically for this, but this can be done for any sequence of integers. Q bar n, sorry, this should be 0. This is equal to product k greater than or equal to 1 by 1 minus q to the k raised to the bk for some sequence bk. Okay, so on a computer you can so you see you can determine b1 from the first few numbers because b2 and so on, b2, b3 and so on will only affect higher terms in the sequence. Then you determine b2, then you determine b3 and so on. So it turns out that b1 is 1, b2 is 3, b3 is 6, b4 is 10, b5 is 15. And this looks very promising, you see, because this is, as you might have guessed, these are the triangular numbers. So these are n choose 2, k choose 2, k plus 1 choose 2. So you had 1 minus qk power 1 here, 1 minus qk power k, and then you are going to have 1 minus qk power k plus 1 choose 2. And in fact, there are theorems in the literature which say that this is, that just extend this and say claim to have a proof. But this looks great. But then the sequence turns ugly. So the sequence becomes continues. So in the next one, instead of being 21 is 20, and they have 26, 34. That's all okay. You have some growing sequence of integers, but then you have minus 186, minus 496. So no one has understood this problem. So this seems to be a hard problem. Okay, so the dream of having a nice generating function for solid partitions is kind of hopeless.
So do you have a formula like for a finite version? I mean, R rows, S T, S columns, T height.
No, nothing. Nobody has anything. In fact, these are notoriously hard to generate. So I think it's very hard to generate even solid partitions, all solid partitions of size 30 or something. I mean, they're very, very difficult, and some people have developed algorithms using quite sophisticated technology to just enumerate all of them. This is also a hard problem. For reasonable sizes, I'm not saying 1,000 or something, just like 20, 30, like that. Okay, so no one knows this pattern, and it's considered by many to be kind of hopeless problem. But of course, its asymptotics you might be able to get using other techniques, but pure enumeration seems kind of hopeless for now. Okay, right. So any questions about this for solid partitions? Yeah.
Switch infinitely often, or is it positive then negative forever or something?
we don't know anything basically. Yeah, we have some 20 numbers, I think, and then there's you can't really conclude anything because they start to become more and more random. Yeah, good. So any questions about this? So I'm going to shift gears now. But before I do, are there any questions? Okay, very good. So what I want to do now is go towards the modern view of plane partitions. For that, I have to introduce a little bit of graph theory, not much, just enough to get us going. So I want to talk about effect matchings or the Dimer model. Oh, right. Before I go there, I wanted to show you some Sage code. Right. So you can try to verify this generating function by computing for small numbers. So if you, for example, if you want to look at all plane partitions of size at most 10, you can take a 10 by 10 by 10 box and look at all plane partitions in there. So now I built another random element which is of size 574, whatever, and here it's pictorial representation. And but here now you see the okay, so I should. So now I want to look at all plane partitions of size 5, let's say. So now if I do this, it will turn out to take far too long because it's going to run through all of them, and this is clearly a bad idea. Already 10 is going to be massive. So I have to interrupt. So this is the key for interrupting command. So maybe I should do like, so I can do 5, maybe okay, let me not even be that ambitious. So let me just do 3. So this is what it looks like, and now let me list all of them which are of size 5. So there are so many. So let's look at the some 133. So, and I will. Oh, so I should not do 5 because I should go at most to 3. So I go up to 4. I mean, my range is 4. Okay, so it's 1136. Maybe I can be a little more ambitious. Let's do 5. Ah, let's take it. Oh, okay, this is too ambitious. Okay, I guess. Anyway, so we got 1136, and what we can do is take the series. So I take, just to be safe, I will take product 1 by 1 is Q. Okay, it will give me an error because I haven't defined Q, but we'll rectify it. Q to the K for, let's say, K in range. I only want up to 3, but I'll take up to 5 just to be safe. So it will give me an error. And let me define. I had it already. Okay, that's right. So Q, and here it is. So now let me take Taylor this Q0, let's say 5. So you see the first 4 terms match. 1136. Okay, so I mean, of course, you can't take an infinite product. So you take the finite product, a large enough finite product, and it will compute the series. Okay, yeah. So that's a quick check. Well, it's not really a check because we haven't done anything non-trivial, but okay, just for that. So of course this is highly inefficient because I'm going through all plane partitions of inside this box. It's probably better to write your own code to generate a large number of plane partitions of size a certain number recursively, and then check this formula. And yeah, okay, very good. So I don't know if you guys have noticed, I have been uploading the latest versions of this file on CoCalc. So I hope, so please feel free to play with it and take a look. Okay. So what we want to do now is to, as I said, go to the modern view of plane partitions. And to do that, and there's some terminology that one has to set. So first, I mean, one has to define things carefully. So so what we are going to talk about is graphs. So graph for us, G will be a tuple, an ordered pair V comma E. V is the set of vertices, and E, which is a subset of V cross V, is the set of edges. And these will be undirected graphs. So what this means is that for every pair of vertices, so any pair of vertices that belongs to E is called an edge, and of course, so we want simple, so our graphs will be undirected and simple. So what does that mean? So undirected means if I and j are vertices, if ij belongs to E, then so does ji. So that's why it's a sub. Okay. So yeah. Anyway, and simple means you have neither multiple edges between vertices, between pairs of vertices, nor do you have edges linking a vertex to itself. Okay, so this is the problem with graphs. I mean, if you want to define them really carefully, it's a mouthful, but everybody has an intuitive understanding of what a graph is. So I just looked up my notes from the course on graph theory, which I offered a year and a half ago, or maybe 2 years ago, and let me just read you the proper definition, I mean, just to tell you how complicated it can get. So it says that a graph G is an ordered pair B, E consisting of a set of vertices, a set E disjoint from V of edges, together with an incidence function psi that associates to each edge an ordered pair of not necessarily distinct vertices of G. You know, this is a mouthful, but as I said, it's usually clear from picture. So for example, let me take something from this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So your G is V is 1 through 5, and E is some pair which I will not write as sets because it's again 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, 4, 2, 4, something like that. Okay, so I don't want to be too pedantic, so I'll stop at that. But if you have any confusions, please ask. Okay. So our graphs will be, as I said, undirected and simple. So what we don't have is things like this. So in other words, E is a set and not a multi-set, and you also don't have things like this, which are called self loops. So the other ones are called parallel edges, just to tell you some notation. And one piece of terminology it would be good to have is that two vertices, maybe I should underline vertices and edges. Two vertices incident on a common edge are adjacent and two edges incident on a common vertex are also adjacent. So we use the term adjacent for both. So again, back to the example. 1 and 3 are adjacent. 1 and 3 are adjacent. Adjacent, but 1 and 4 not. And similarly, let's say 2, 3 and 3, 4 are adjacent, but 1, 3 and 2, 4. Okay, so this is vertex adjacency and adjacency. Okay. Okay, so there are some families of graphs that's good to know. Let's say, okay, but maybe I shouldn't. Okay, that's probably a good idea just to keep in mind. So a complete graph the complete graph on n vertices denoted Kn has every pair of vertices adjacent. So it has all possible edges. Okay, another important definition for us, especially. So for so K3, for example, is the triangle. K4 is that, and so on. Okay. And another thing, as I said, we're going to need. So I'll make this a definition because it's going to be important. A graph G is bipartite if V can be partitioned into two subsets, X and Y. Partition means that is, i.e., V is a disjoint union of X and Y, such that every edge has one end in X and the other in Y. End of an edge is what you think it is. I mean, so for the edge 2, 3, 2 and 3 are the ends. Okay. So what this says is you can, what you can do is divide the set of vertices such that there are no edges within X and no edges within Y. So all the edges connect X and Y. So for pictorial purposes, it's often convenient to draw them in two rows. So this is, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you can have something. Okay, so this is an example of a bipartite graph. Okay. And okay, so I think that's, so you might think this is highly restrictive, but it turns out that a lot of important graphs are bipartite. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so I can keep going forever and ever, but because there are lots of things one can say about graphs. But the other thing I will need for now at least is the notion of planarity. Uh, so the graph is planar if it can be drawn in the plane, that is R2, or if you want on the blackboard or on a piece of paper, so that, or on the tablet, so that the edges intersect only at the ends. Okay, and so not every graph is planar. So for example, I drew here up to K4. If I draw K5, so for example, K1 to K4 are planar, but K5. Okay, so this. So this is not completely trivial, because I'm saying that there is this. It can be drawn. So just because you don't have the imagination does not mean that the graph is non-planar. So for example, K4 uh, can be drawn this way. So, so this sort of should remind you of a 3D picture. So this is a tetrahedron, basically. So you think of this outside the plane of the paper, for example. But so you might think that it's not planar, but it is in fact planar as I drew over here. If you put this vertex over here. But K5 manifestly cannot be uh, drawn this way, and to see that you actually need the Jordan curve theorem. Okay, so these are non-trivial things. So a deep theorem of graph planarity is the so-called Kuratowski's theorem, named after this Polish mathematician Kazimierz Kuratowski, after whom the K in the Kn is for him, in his honor. Okay, anyway, so there are lots of things to say about that. Okay, so right, so let me show you that K5 is indeed not. So I have, okay, so just before we go there, so Sage, I should want to tell you that Sage has an extensive graph library. So to see that, you type graphs dot and you press tab, and you will have, you see, you have many families of graphs. So one of the most famous non-trivial graphs is the so-called Petersen graph. It's well known for being the first counterexamples for many natural theorems that you might want to state about graphs. So what does it look like? So this is the most common drawing of the Petersen graph. So it's a pentagram surrounded by a pentagon and aligned in the natural way. Okay. So yeah, so Sage also has a very good plotting library for graphs. So this is just one graph, but you have families of graphs. So that's what I was doing here. So I'll come to perfect matches later, but I can do. So the grid 2D takes two parameters, and so here is it. And if I plot it, I get what you expect. So it's a subgraph of Z2 uh, with so many rows and so many columns. The first parameter is the rows. But you can do many, I mean, you can look, there are many families of graphs already inbuilt there, so there's a lot of playing around. So complete graph. Okay, so now let me do the complete graph. So Peterson graph I showed you, so let's see, complete graph, and let's say 4, and let's plot that. So you see Sage is plotting it in a non-planar way. But for 5 there is really no choice. This is what it looks like. So by the way, if you have not realized it already, the complete graph Kn is the graph of the adjacency graph of the simplex, of the n simplex. If you know what that is, if you don't, it's okay. All right. So okay. Okay, let me also show you some bipartite graphs. So I didn't define it formally, but there is also the complete bipartite graph. So remember what I said about the bipartite graph. You have two sets of vertices, and what the complete bipartite graph does is it within this constraint has all possible edges. So if I do K35, let's say, so this is what it looks like. So I have 3 vertices on top, 5 vertices on bottom, and everything on top is connected to everything in the bottom and vice versa. Okay. So it turns out that another important non-planar graph is K33. So that's this graph. So I told you K5 is not planar and K33 is not planar, and this theorem of Kuratowski says that essentially, where essentially means something complicated, these are the only 2 graphs. So not in that sense, in the sense that any graph which is non-planar because of having intrinsically inside it either a K5 or a K. Okay. Anyway, okay, so that's just for your information. Okay. Okay, so now I think I have defined everything, all the graph notions that I need to talk about perfect matching. So let me define what a matching is. A matching M in a graph G is a set of pairwise non-adjacent edges. So what it's saying is you take a collection of edges, and for any 2 edges they should not have a vertex in common, and any such collection is called a matching. It's basically the word tells you what it is. It matches one set of vertices, one subset of vertices with the other. And okay, so let me give an example. So I'll come to this example again and again. Okay. Okay. So you see, 10 vertices, and let me take a collection. So here is, oh, okay, before that, let me just copy this. Okay, so here is a so this is a matching. So example of a matching. Okay, it's just some collection of edges. Nobody is saying anything more, but we'll refine this, of course. Okay, so so three related definitions. So a maximal matching is one which cannot be extended to a larger match by adding edges. Okay. So here, let me give an example. Okay, let me use another color. So let me take this, 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 and this. Okay. So there are 10 vertices. I already have 4 matched edges, so there are only 2 remaining. But there's no way that this is a matching because they are not edges. Okay. So this is an example of that. A maximum matching is one which covers as many vertices as possible. Okay, so I mean, so what it says is that this is the maximum number that of vertices that can possibly be matched, or the maximum number of edges that can be simultaneously matched. So of course, some other color. So there's one obvious maximum matching for this example, which is simply to match all of them pairwise this way. There are many others. So example of that. Okay, and the last and most important for us. So remember that in a general graph, even the maximum matching need not match all vertices. Okay. But what we are going to be interested in is a perfect matching. It's also called one factor. It's also called dimer covering. is one which covers every. So this example is both a maximum matching and a perfect match. Okay. So, all right. Any questions so far? Okay. So good. Okay. So now I think I have all the definitions necessary. So maybe I'll start moving forward. So what we want to do is to look at perfect matchings. Of planar graphs. And so let me motivate this first. Okay. So, so the motivation comes from physics, or rather chemistry, is the problem of adsorption. So those of you who were in my graph theory course 2 years ago have already heard this. So what is adsorption? So adsorption is the absorption of gas molecules onto the surface of a solid. So as you might know, a solid is a crystal. So absorption of this absorption on a surface. So since a solid, as you might know, is a crystal, so maybe drawing skills are, as you already know, not very good. Attempt something. So this is supposed to be the surface of a solid, and of course there is. It goes down, etc. This is the surface. So shade it in some way. So what happens when gas molecules adsorb? So let's imagine adsorption of let's say a diatomic molecule, diatomic gas. So like O2 or anything. So what it's going to do, I mean, all this is very hand waving. I mean, it's not technically correct, but you know, we are mathematicians, so we will abstract this. So what it's going to do is it's going to find a way to sit inside this lattice. Right? This lattice is quite regular. Of course, there are defects and all that, but for the most part, it's regular. So it's going to sit inside in some natural way, and for at least some class of molecules, they will sit. So they will sit matching the edge. So N2 is like, for example, N2 is N. Let's say this is N. So what's going to happen is the N is going to sit here, one N is going to sit here, and they're going to be matched. And maybe another N is going to sit here, another N is going to sit here, and they're going to be matched. Right? So very roughly speaking, when you have this cloud of gas and you have this adsorbent material, it's going to attract some of these guys, and they're going to sit in some random way, and one wants to measure this in some sense. So what does measuring mean? So one way of measuring is to simply count how many ways that they can occupy this lattice. Okay, that is some notion of measure of the complexity of this process, if you like. So I'm deliberately avoiding some buzzwords, but I hope you get the point. I mean, the point is, at the end of the day, we want to count how many perfect matchings there are. So aim. So at the end of this long story, so what is the aim? Aim is to count the number of perfect matches on this lattice. Right. So you can easily imagine that you are in some supersaturated atmosphere. So then they will occupy as many as possible. And you know, again, this may not be technically true. I mean, for example, if an n sits here and an n sits here, this cannot be, like that. But the point is that this count is going to give you some indication of the complexity of this process. Okay, is that clear? So, of course, physicists and chemists and so on will deal with lattices, but you know, this problem naturally extends to any graph. I mean, one wants to, as is usual in mathematics, you know, abstract the problem out to its natural level, and here the level seems to be for graphs. Okay, so what we will do, in at least initially, is to consider. So, of course, the surface of a solid is a lattice, which is of course a planar graph, because that is, by definition, right? It's sitting on a surface. So, what we are going to do is to try to find a way to count perfect matchings of planar graphs. Is this clear? Any questions about the motivation? Okay, good. But one can do something more general, and so let me define that. So more generally, we consider what is called a weighted graph. Where each edge E in E has a weight WE. So the weight is, you can think of it as a real number if you like. From the application point of view, that would be the energy or cost of that edge. But for now, at least, we will think of it as a symbolic parameter. There will be some formal variable and commuting. So for each edge, you are going to have a weight, and they will all commute. Okay, so commuting family of it. Okay, so if you have a weighted graph, and suppose graph G, let's say, and suppose M is a perfect matching of G, the weight of M is what? Is W of M, say WT of M. This is the product of E in E, W, E in M, sorry. So this takes the product of the energies. Well, as you might know from thermodynamics, your weights are going to be e to the something, and so taking the product of these is taking the sum of the energies. Roughly that's what. Okay. Okay, so that's the weight of M. Then the partition function is given by Zg. This is Z, if you like, which depends on the graph. This is the sum of all M which are perfect matchings. Weight of M. Okay. So if all the weights were 1, you would get a contribution of 1 to each perfect matching, and this will just give you the number of perfect. So the aim is to calculate Z. Okay, this is what we want to do. So partition function is an important term, and the weight of perfect matching is that.
I mean, sir, we are not interested in all matchings, only perfect matchings.
Yes, we are only interested in perfect matchings because, well, the ultimate answer to that is that there's a nice answer for this and not for yeah. So okay, since you asked that, I can also say something more. So suppose you don't have a purely diatomic vapor. I mean, you are sitting, this solid is sitting in a combination of a monoatomic and a diatomic gas. Then you can easily imagine that the isolated vertices are occupied by these monoatomic gas molecules, and otherwise, so there will be a combination of monoatomic and diatomic gas molecules, and one can think that any configuration here, any matching whatsoever, including the empty matching, can be thought of as an arrangement of monoatomic and diatomic gas. So anything that is not part of the matching is occupied by monoatomic gas molecule. So then this is called the monomer dimer model. So by the way, yeah, this is why this is called the dimer model. Perfect matching or dimer cover. So so just note. So note, maybe remark. So this is why this problem is called the dimer model. Right. So the problem that I just mentioned, where you have both monoatomic and diatomic, is called the monomer dimer model, because you have both monoatomic and diatomic. Yes. Okay. Right. So to break the suspense at this point, what we will prove is that there is a nice formula for Zg, and the graph is planar for any graph. A nice formula where nice means something specific, which I'll get. Okay. Okay, so now now I'm going to digress. I'm going to introduce some background needed to explain the result. So I'll need some notions from linear algebra or some theorems from linear algebra. Okay, so so now I'm going to use the word matching in a different sense. So, but I hope it won't cause any confusion. So we will only talk about perfect matchings. So this should hopefully not cause any confusion. So consider two endpoints on a circle. Okay, then a matching mu is an arrangement of n disjoint chords. So, for example, let's say I take 6 chords here. This way, this way, this way. Oops. Okay, so this is an example of a matching in this context. Okay, so when there are two endpoints on a circle, to such a matching, we define or denote phi mu to be the number of crossings. So you think of these points on the circle in generic position. Okay, so whenever you have 3 crossing at a point, you don't you count them as. So in other words, whenever there is a crossing, exactly 2 chords cross. Not you don't have 3 chords crossing. Okay, I hope that's clear. Of mu. The sign of mu is SGN of mu is -1 to the chi. So this mu has sign mu is -1. So this is right, because there is exactly one. So quick question. What is the number of matchings of two endpoints on a circle? Can anybody see it quickly?
Double factor.
Yeah. So the number of matchings is equal to 1 times 3 times 5 times etc. up to 2n minus 1. And this is denoted 2n minus 1 double factorial. So double because you're skipping. So how do you see this? So look at 1, it has to be matched to somebody. There are 2n minus 1 possibilities. So let's say it's matched to somebody, so let's say 3. Now there are 4 points remaining, and you continue by induction if you like, or you can just see. Now you take the smallest unmatched point in value, let's say 2 here, and then see where it match it to one of 2n minus 3 different points, and so on. You continue that way, and you get this one. So write mu as I1 J1. Let me not put that. Okay, let me start. So you'll write mu as I1 J1, I2 J2, etc. up to IN Jn. This means I1 is matched to J1, I2 matched to I2, etc. But there are many ways of writing this, so we need some convention with two constraints. One is A, ik less than jk for all k. So the smaller number is first, and B, j1 is less than j2 is less than j1. Okay. So for the above example, mu is what? So I have 1, 4, 2, 1, 3, 2, 4, and 5, 6. So okay, that is exactly. So 1, 3, 2, 4, 5, 6. So these numbers are 3, 4, 6. Okay. In this case, I1 also. I mean, I1 is less than I2 is less than I3 also, but that's not the generic rule. So okay, so let's do n equals 4. So I have copy this. Let's see all possible matchings here. These are also perfect matches, really. So let's say we match 1 to 2, 3 to 4. This is mu. This is 5 mu. So this has 0 crossing, so the sign is plus 1. Then I'll match 1 to 3 and 2 to 4. This has 1 crossing, and the sign is minus 1. And then I match 1 to 4, then 2 to 3. So again 0 crossing. And that's all. Because 1 can be matched to 3 people, and that forces 1. Yeah, that forces the other ones. Okay. So here is a definition. The reason for this definition will become clear in the next theorem. So let A be a 2n by 2n real skew symmetric matrix. And the Pfaffian of A it's denoted PF of A. This is the sum overall mu. Oh, okay, I didn't define Mn. Okay. Should have done it here. Okay. So let Mn be the set of such matchings. So this example is M4. Okay, so the Pfaffian is the sum over mu in Mn, where mu is I1, J1, etc. for In, Jn, exactly as before. Sine of mu, right, which is minus 1 to the number of crossings. A of I1, J1, etc. Product. So this is the product of this. Okay, so this is the Pfaffian. So for example, if A is such a 4 by 4 matrix, from the example above, we have Pfaffian of A is A1 to A34 from here. I1, J1 is 1, 2, I2, J2 is 3, 4. Sign is 0, so this comes with a plus sign. Minus A13, A24 plus A14, A24. Okay, where these are the entries. So it's Aij. Okay, why is this important or interesting? Is this due to this beautiful theorem of Cayley? Let A be a 2n by 2n real symmetric matrix. Then the determinant of A is the square of the far field. It's exactly the square. In the sense of variables. So for this example, the determinant of this matrix will be the square of this matrix. Okay. So I'll not go through the proof. So because it will take us far afield. See proof in Grualdi and Weiser, for example. Combinatorial matrix theory has this. But there are many other places you'll find it. You'll find some proofs on the internet as well. For some reason, or whatever. Linear algebra has so many nice theorems that it's not possible to have everything. But I think this result should be there in basic linear algebra course, but it doesn't seem to be. The most standard books on linear algebra do not. Introductory textbooks do not have it. But it's really nice thing. So let me show you here. Okay, so let me tell you what I did in advance. So I defined these variables Aij for I and j going from 0 to 0 to 3. Okay, so this is the matrix form of this. I calculated its determinant. Okay, it has 24 terms. You can check. And now what I want to do, okay, so I want to build a skew symmetric matrix from this. So let's do that. Okay, so I don't see any obvious way of doing it. So let's write a loop. So let's say B is a matrix in the symbolic ring of size 4 and 4. Okay, good. Now okay, so that's fine. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll build a skew symmetry. Okay, so for I in range 4, for j in range 4, if I is less than j, then B of I j is equal to A of I j. So A is this matrix already. Okay. And is LF? Yeah, LF. I is greater than j. I want Bij to be minus. I want it to be skew symmetric, remember. So Ji, else, which is the diagonal entry, I want to be 0. Okay, let's hope this works. No. Vector is immutable.
Sir, you would like to use the square I comma j notation. Like if the square notation gives out this error.
Oh, should I use I comma j?
Yeah.
Like this?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. This okay. So I've not fully understood that. Sometimes that I comma j works. Sometimes. Okay, great. Thanks. So let's see B. Okay. So you see it's Q symmetric. This is A01 minus A01, etc. And now let us compute det of B. Now let's factor it. So you see. So I got A03, A12 squared. Okay. So this is the unfortunate shift in stage. So actually, let's look at this term and let's compare with what I have in mind. So this is, so if I shift indices by 1, this is A12, A34 with a plus sign, you see, and that is this. And this one is A13, A24. That's this one with a minus sign. And this is also with a plus sign, A14, A23. Okay. So the determinant of this matrix B is exactly the square of its roughly. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think we are time. Okay. Let me stop counting.